Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhnio. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and right now I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of August the 6th. So don't forget to like this video, push like buttons, then subscribe to our YouTube channel if you are not yet subscribed. Then leave your comments just below the video. I will start with some good news, war news, because seems like Ukraine is going to have really good war equipment and be provided with that by our European allies. So let's take a look what is going on in such political and diplomatical issues, and then move on to actually battle map situation. So we've achieved a certain level of stability and confidence regarding arms supplies. Yesterday, following a phone conversation, first of all, the president of Ukraine had phone talks with Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General. He spoke with US President Donald Trump and stated that in just 2 days, we have over $1 billion from our European partners, NATO members, for the purchase of American weapons. What does this mean? Essentially, it is a confirmation of the fact that we will have weapons. At least for our current operational needs, these weapons will be provided. And in just 2 days, the mechanism for filling this special fund has already amounted to $1 billion, of which exactly half is being covered by the Nordic countries. These are Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Denmark. All of them will participate in this project. What is this project? The project is called PEARL, or actually PAL. I don't know how to pronounce this abbreviation correctly. Prioritized Ukraine requirements list, meaning a prioritized list of Ukrainian requests. This is a program that was agreed upon and announced by the current Minister of Defense, Shmihal, a program that was previously developed by our Western partners together with us, a program that envisions the production of American weapons. It will be paid for with funds, with their own physical resources by our European NATO partners, and then via transit through Europe, the weapons will reach Ukraine. The list of the weapons we need will be determined by the Ukrainian General Staff and approved by the Supreme Commander of NATO forces, NATO troops in Europe. So this is essentially the concept for building the framework I am describing right now. That's why I'm basically starting with this news. What is very important, fundamentally important, is that there will be weapons. They might not. Maybe we won't be flooded with them. Maybe, on the contrary, the supply will increase in the near future. And we're still waiting to see what the actual terms will be of the so-called drone deal with the United States, the major agreement announced by Prime Minister Sviridenko. We'll see how it develops. At least for now, the trend is actually quite positive. $1 billion in 2 days is, you have to admit, not bad. And now let's move on to the front to talk about what's happening there. The point of greatest tension, the biggest problem area for us, remains Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. It remains so, and obviously will continue to remain so. Because let's be honest, what we're witnessing right now, there is no such thing as a half encirclement, no such thing as a half ring or anything like that. There is physical encirclement and there is operational encirclement. Operational encirclement is when the logistical routes are cut off. Right now, the occupiers are, in fact, almost at the point where they can declare the operational encirclement of the Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad area. How can this be seen? How is all of this constructed? We have, as I always say, 3 routes. This is no secret. There are 3 routes that connect Pokrovsk to the wider world, so to speak. The first route is the road to the west towards Pavlohrad. The second route is the road to Hrishin. Well, it leads to Dobropilya, yes, very roughly speaking. And the third route goes through Rodinske and Bilitske, also leading to Dobropilya. So what are we seeing now? The Russians have once again advanced in the direction of Rodinske. Rodinske is now a critically important settlement that we need to talk about. So that's the situation. So these advances that have recently taken place here, north of Rodinske and in Rodinske itself, do not bode well for us, because this settlement is actually critical for the defense of this area, apart from the road that physically passes through Rodinske, further to Bilitske, and on to Dobropilya. It's important to understand that Rodinske is also an area from which one can actually enter our cities from the rear, such as Myrnohrad and ultimately Pokrovsk as well. In other words, this is another additional point in the rear from which strikes can be launched. In addition, it's important to understand that Rodinske is also crucial because it is a relatively large settlement. For example, there is a mine on its eastern side. The Rodinsky mine, the Krasnolimansk mine are right here. And the occupiers are already establishing themselves there. They are already consolidating their positions in the mine. You can see these strikes on the mine facility, which are being carried out by the fighters of the 14th Operational Brigade of the National Guard, Chervona Kalina. These are, of course, perfectly executed sniper drops of TM mines. Well, just look at that. It lands perfectly, right into the hole. But in reality, the very basis for such shelling, that is the enemy's presence at the mine, is an extremely, extremely bad situation for us. Because by entrenching themselves at such large sites, industrial facilities that have plenty of cover and may even have basements, the occupiers can obviously stockpile and amass a large number of personnel there. If, in this case, they also advance from the mines directly into Rodinske, and as I mentioned, Rodinske is not a small settlement, they will accumulate their personnel here for further assault operations, the so-called meat grinder attacks. In addition, they will be able to station UAV operators here, and those UAV operators in turn will be able to create with their FPV drones so-called kill zones within 15 to 20 kilometers from Rodinske. Do you want to see what 15 kilometers looks like? Here you go. Well, not only that, it will be able to reach as far as cutting off the highway to the west of Pokrovsk. That's basically the same distance as to Dobropilia. It completely covers the entire area of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. That's it. In short, if you put a point in Rodinsky with a 15-kilometer radius, it would make a kind of circle. Something like that, more or less. This is the 15 kilometers that Russian drones will be able to cover from here, from Rodinsky. And the worst part is that the UAV operators will be able to gather here. That is, they will have shelter. Accordingly, the defense of Rodinsky is probably the most difficult and most important thing happening right now from the perspective of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. Moreover, from Rodinsky, there is a line of sight for shelling Hrishin. Ultimately, this is what we are conveying here on the satellite image. There are no hidden, so to speak, roads here. Here you can see this highway that runs through Hraishin, Novoalexandrivka, and further leads to Dobropilia. So this highway will be fired upon directly from Rodinsky, because compared to Rodinsky, Hraishin is situated in a lowland. Accordingly, we understand that the defense forces of Ukraine are doing everything possible to prevent this from happening. However, the situation with the logistics being cut off along the highway to Pavlohrad has, in fact, essentially been realized since the time of the defense of Kotlin. Here is Kotlin in the south. The occupiers have little hope of advancing here, but the physical proximity of their positions, just 7 kilometers away, still makes this road impassable. Right now, the roadblock on the highway in Rodinske and the potential future roadblock in Hrishin are effectively creating a critical situation for our units in this section of the front. There's a lot that could be said about it, but only one thing is clear. Only something extraordinary, something almost fantastic can save it. These days, of course, the incredible operation carried out by the defense forces in the Kursk region exactly a year ago comes to mind. Something similarly asymmetric is called for. Something like that is what we want to talk about, but unfortunately, talking is all we can do for now. Because the Russians, for example, yesterday, Putin supposedly, according to Bloomberg, and by the way, one should treat the insights from this outlet with caution. But Bloomberg reported that Putin allegedly wants to make a proposal, and today, supposedly, there is to be another meeting between the Russian dictator and Steve Witkoff. He is Trump's special envoy on issues including Russia and the Middle East. Well, their special envoy. So he is supposed to meet with Putin and hear a proposal from Russia that they are ready for a complete air ceasefire. That is not to strike Ukrainian territory with deep strikes in an attempt to somehow appease Trump and avoid American sanctions. Well, this could honestly be an option on the table. And I clearly understand that Putin has absolutely no intention whatsoever of stopping on the ground, of halting his advances there. His generals are even reporting to him that the front could collapse in 2 or 3 months. I won't even bother to justify this right now. I'll just say that this is nonsense, because there isn't even a hint of a situation where the front could collapse in 2 or 3 months, or where Pokrovsk could be lost. The real loss of Pokrovsk during this period of time could actually happen. This needs to be understood. But, well, actually, if this proposal with the shelling really ends up on the table, then the most important thing is that Trump doesn't take the bait, because he might see these peacekeeping gestures, these steps in Putin's actions, and, so to speak, swallow the bait. Why is it important that he doesn't take the bait? Well, from the perspective that we support sanctions against Russia and those who buy their oil, we also understand, and I personally am firmly convinced, that if this ceasefire is declared, it will be broken the very same day. In fact, by some kind of shelling. Moreover, right now, it's not even clear who would actually benefit from it. It's unclear because the armed forces of Ukraine have recently established a rather effective system of deep strikes. Even though Russia produces 100, 200, 300 and launches up to 700 imitation drones and Shaheds, they are not achieving the same successes that we are. After all, just yesterday there was a publication about the fact that nearly half of those oil refineries hit by Ukrainian armed forces drones in recent days have been taken out of operation. We are witnessing the havoc our drones are wreaking in the Volgograd region, particularly with logistics and everything happening in those areas.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Well, before we move on to that, let me share a few more stories. Putin, meanwhile, it's important to understand, has no intention of stopping on land. All of this, I'll repeat once more, is just his bait in the context of trying to appease Trump. What leads us to conclude that Putin isn't planning to stop? These are the words of Syrskyi. Yesterday, he held a large meeting with the leaders of our army, Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, and said that Russia aims to form 10 new divisions by the end of the year, 2 of which have already been created. At the same time, according to him, in July, the occupiers' losses amounted to more than 30,000 personnel. But despite this, the enemy increases its grouping by 9,000 people every month. That is, if we take into account 33,000 eliminated personnel, of which 17,000 are killed in action. So just last month, as I have already mentioned, the defense forces crossed that threshold of 50% in the ratio between irrecoverable losses and recoverable sanitary losses, meaning wounded Russians. And so the irrecoverable losses amounted to a ratio of 17 to 16,000. 52% essentially in the solid overall total of 100% of Russian losses. But that's not the point. That's not what we're talking about right now. If we understand that their losses in July amounted to 33,000 and they are increasing by 9, that is the pace, the enemy's mobilization of personnel has increased from the previous figures of 30 to 35,000 to 42,000. And these are the words of the commander-in-chief, who states that the Russians, thanks to this positive dynamic, are forming additional divisions. By the way, we can talk a lot and throw up our hands here, but at the same time, we also need to address the fact that we, Ukraine, understanding that in 2025, Russia will focus primarily on infantry, have not done or prepared for this strategic issue of how we will counter this infantry. And this is actually the biggest question that arises for Syrskyi, for the president, and for everyone responsible at the strategic level regarding what we are talking about now. By the way, going back to the map, I would like to point out that the Russians are actually having successes in the Novopavlivka direction as well. In that direction, they are advancing, for example, even on the deep state map. New points of their progress have appeared recently in the area from Voskresenka towards Malivka. Malivka is in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Voskresenka is still in the Donetsk region. And earlier, the occupiers had already made incursions into Malivka here. Now they are making these incursions, so to speak, more frequently. And more or less, let's be honest again, we're not here to do propaganda. The Russians are already occupying some areas of the Dnipropetrovsk region. That is both in the Malivka area and in the Dakne area. We can't say that this is a final consolidation, but nevertheless, it's a fact. And in the area of Taimirivka, which is already in the Zaporizhzhia region, beyond the administrative borders toward Neshchina, this is exactly what Putin is counting on, that he'll gain some kind of advantage for himself. The most he can hope for is Pokrovsk. Although in reality, we have to honestly understand that this is a devastated territory. But of course, that doesn't make it any easier for us. Returning to those shellings, as I mentioned, it's not even clear who would benefit from this ceasefire on drone attacks if it actually happens. The crucial point to emphasize is that in recent times, the defense forces have achieved considerable success in effectively striking logistics, particularly the vital railway logistics within 2 distinct regions of southern Russia. These are the Rostov region and the Volgograd region. That is, on the routes between Rostov and Volgograd, what is happening is truly a complete nightmare for the enemy. And now, to some extent, they are also interested in stopping such strikes on their own logistics. Yesterday, between Azov and Bataisk, which is near Rostov-on-Don, it is marked as Oziv, not Azov, on the deep state map. Azov-Bataisk, right here near the settlement of Ovoshtchnoy, a Ukrainian drone was flying. It was flying along the peaceful Ukrainian drone Komarik, but for some reason, the Russians suddenly decided to shoot it down. And they shot it down so unsuccessfully that they ended up losing their own anti-aircraft missile. This is the kind of explosion that was recorded. Now, the most interesting part is that the anti-aircraft missile actually struck the very military unit from which it was launched. So essentially, it was a false start of the anti-aircraft missile, which obviously didn't work as it was supposed to. And there was such a huge blaze that the locals were amazed. They said their windows were blown out. And as they claimed in the video, it flew straight into the military unit. I'm not showing these videos, let's say, without commentary, because there's an incredible amount of Russian profanity in them, which they use while expressing their outrage at such a strike that hit the unit near Bataisk, caused by their own air defense. But this is nothing other than the result of our drone operations. The Cyber Boroshno community created this infographic. I tweaked it a bit, so to speak, highlighting all the incidents from July 21, basically up to today, August 6th, July 23rd. So how long is that? And that's roughly about 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, I counted almost 13 strikes on the enemy's railway infrastructure. And now I suggest we go through all of them. So this is the Likaya station. Moreover, in recent days, this station was hit twice, meaning it was struck a second time. This is a junction station that has remained a very important logistics hub since the days of the ATO. And of course, it has not ceased to play such an important, crucial logistical role during the full-scale invasion. It was hit twice. Next, further south from Likaya, closer to Rostov, is Kamenolomnya. There, the electric centralization of this substation was likely destroyed. This element, the electric centralization, is essentially the brain of any station, which allows the dispatcher using an electronic panel to manage and organize train movements without the need for manual switching of tracks, without that manual operation. In other words, this worsens the automation of processes. All of this requires manually switching the tracks. It can be done. It doesn't paralyze operations. But in reality, when a railway station is under heavy load, it creates problems for it. And the point is that in Kamenolomny, this electric centralization station was actually built in 2017. So it's essentially, well, not brand new, but almost unused. There were strikes in Novocherkassk as well as in Piszczano-Kopski and Salsk. In Piszczano-Kopski, the centralization station was also hit. In Salsk, a train carrying petroleum products was hit and the railway infrastructure was therefore damaged. Next, we have the Dvoyneye station, which is a traction substation. Next is Jutovo, the Jutovo substation, a traction substation with a capacity of 110 kilowatts. And also, by the way, in Jutovo, the electric centralization station was likely hit. And just recently, the electric centralization post at Arkada station was also attacked. And yesterday, the Tatsinskaya railway station in the Rostov region was also attacked. What am I getting at? This whole array of problems that have been created, all these strikes, which essentially have a cumulative effect, will over time create a logistical problem for the enemy, one that they will feel more and more as time goes on. In other words, these strikes will continue unless Trump suddenly accepts Putin's absolutely fraudulent proposal, if it really is on the negotiating table. But whether it is or not, we don't know. We will find out about this later as we analyze, including what happens today. Some leaks of information from the meeting between Putin and Witkoff will obviously emerge, or rather start appearing in the information space. And if this does happen, I will report on it, including on my Telegram channel, which I encourage you friends to subscribe to. Pekhnio Sobachka, or rather Pekhnio _news. That is how you can find me in the search bar of this social network, or below in the description of this video, you'll find a direct link to this social network and to my Telegram channel, which is my own original creation. So I encourage you to join, and thank you for your attention today. On that note, I'll wrap things up. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and see you next time.